the co-partners or the brothers have entered into a partition deed. They have divided the property amongst themselves. But say, suppose the partition is not registered as is required under the section. Then, as per the law, as per the amended section, such a partition is not recognized at all. Therefore, there is scope or room to reopen the partition. Now, there is a very interesting concept so far as the partition of a joint family property is concerned. What is the interpretation of the courts? Again, we are going into some provisions of the Code of Civil Procedure. As all of you know, there are two kinds of decrees, a preliminary decree and a final decree. Now, so far as partitions are concerned, it has been held by other courts and even by the Supreme Court that a preliminary decree is no decree at all. In fact, in another judgment which had reached the Supreme Court earlier on when the amendment was brought in, a preliminary decree was claimed. When the daughter sought to be made a party herself, the brothers claimed that there is already a preliminary decree, you cannot get a share. Ultimately, the Supreme Court interpreted it in what way? They said that because there is no final decree, the daughters who are now co-partners are entitled to their share, and the final decree will have to be reworked by inserting or recognizing the shares of the daughters. So that is the interpretation that was given, of course, by the Supreme Court. Now, if I speak of partitions and I again digress a bit here, it is important to understand when we are speaking about Mitakshara co-partnery partitions that there were two or three kinds of partitions that could take place earlier. This is not exactly on the current section 6, but since we are on the subject, I would like to speak about it. See, of course, oral partitions were recognized earlier. Then, even am I audible?
Yes, sir. Please proceed.
Yeah.
Your order. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So, oral partitions were recognized earlier, but even in partitions, there were two kinds of partitions that were recognized in Hindu law. And what were the two kinds of partitions? One was partition as to person. One co-partner going out of the co-partnery and the other co-partners continuing joint. So partial as to person, it was known as a partition which is partial as to person. One co-partner going out, the others continuing as co-partners. Then there was also another partition which was called as a partition which was partial as to property. To put that in perspective, I'll explain. Suppose the co-partnery had say 5 properties and the co-partners decided that let us dispose of one of the properties, we need the money for something or the other. That property would be sold off. Maybe the proceeds would be divided amongst the co-partners. So that property going out of the co-partnery was known as partial as to property. But all that was put to an end by an amendment to the Indian Income Tax Act. The Indian Income Tax Act de-recognized partial partitions. That is section 171, I believe, of the Indian Income Tax Act. And there was also a famous case which went up to the Supreme Court, that is known as Apurva Shantilal's case, somewhere in the 80s. Partial partitions were de-recognized. So even right now, if you look at it, it's a very dichotomous situation. Under Hindu law, a partial partition may be recognized, but because the income tax law is a law which deals with revenue, since the revenue has de-recognized it, a partial partition cannot work. Either there is a full partition or there is no partition at all, which has been held by the courts. That is, of course, as I said, Apurva Shantilal's case, interpretation of Section 171 and provisions of the Hindu law, Shastric Hindu law also. So, this is what has happened. Again, here interesting to note, in one judgment which was not directly dealing with Hindu law, in fact, that judgment dealt with, I immediately do not have the citation, I'm sorry for that, I have referred to it, but that was a case under Muslim law, where the Supreme Court went into various aspects of partition of the joint property of a Muslim family. There they also referred to certain provisions of the Hindu law. But what has been held there, it is just one line, but it is a classic line that while looking at the provisions of a special enactment, it is that enactment that should prevail. That is what is said. And I have, of course, commented in Mulla's Hindu law about this, that it is high time that either the legislature looks into it or the courts interpret it in that way, so that here the revenue would be taking second place. What is the substantive provision has to be looked at, and the substantive provision here would be the, say, Partition Act, the Indian Partition Act, read with, of course, the provisions of the Hindu Succession Act, which deal with partition. So that would have to take precedence and not the Income Tax Act. A financial statute cannot dictate, according to me, what is there in the substantive provision. That is, of course, what I feel. My view may or may not count, but that is what I feel. So basically, again, returning to Vinita versus Rakesh, what did the Supreme Court hold? As I said, they held that daughter, whenever she is born, she becomes a co-partner. It is not necessary that the father should be alive as on the date that she becomes a co-partner. On partitions, the Supreme Court has held that they have to be in the manner that has been set out in the statute. Therefore, even older partitions which have not taken place as per this section, they can probably be reopened. And in fact, this is practically what will happen, because if you see the last few words of the Supreme Court judgment, then what the Supreme Court has said is that in the next 6 months, all those courts where these cases are pending should be taken up and disposed of. Because now, one thing is clear, all courts throughout the country where the issue of 2005 amendment of the Hindu Succession Act is concerned, they are now not to look at as to whether a daughter is a co-partner or not. That issue is gone. It's sacrosanct, daughter is a co-partner. So what has to be looked at now only is this, that has the partition taken place in the proper manner or not. Of course, various defenses are likely to be put forward by the brothers. Various pleas are likely to be taken. Then, of course, it will again depend upon the interpretation by the courts as to how they find the partition has taken place properly or not. Carrying this further, of course, as I said, partitions by two ways. One is, of course, by way of a partition deed. The second is by a court case. Now, there is also another thing here. There is something in Hindu law which is known as a family arrangement. Even a partition can even take place by way of a family arrangement. Of course, the courts would then thereafter construe that family arrangement to be a partition deed and act accordingly. But then that has its own jurisprudence, its own rules. Of course, that would have to be registered. Again, if it is not registered, maybe the courts will hold that no, we'll look at it but only for secondary purposes. In one case, in fact, the Supreme Court said that if the proper court fee, if the proper registration fees, etc., are paid, then we will look into it, otherwise not. So even family arrangements can be looked at if they affect a partition. So that is a third mode. As I said in the beginning of the lecture, so far as the old section 6 is concerned, the unamended section 6 is concerned, uh, without saying that Uttam versus Sobhak Singh is overruled, the Supreme Court has effectively overruled Uttam versus Sobhak Singh. So that interpretation by the Supreme Court goes, and rightly so, because partitions, there are only two modes. There cannot be a partition, as I said, by way of an interpretative process that no, somebody has died, automatically partition takes place, because Hindu law does not recognize it to be so. Judgment in Prakash versus Phulvati is fully gone. The other judgment, the later judgment of Justice Sikri, has been upheld, but only goes to the extent that it agrees with what was stated in Prakash versus Phulvati. That is only so far as partitions are concerned. So, in effect, I would say that 90% of that judgment is sacrosanct, it remains. Only the portion that deals with the interpretation of partition has gone. So, this is how the matters stand right now. Daughters have a full share, have a full right to be co-partners. They can probably reopen partitions as per the interpretation of the Supreme Court. So that is so far as my talk on Vinita versus Rakesh is concerned. But I would like to take this further. Students can concentrate on this probably. What are the other rights that a female could have once she has been given rights or full rights as a co-partner? Because mark the words, she has all rights and liabilities. Obviously, when a person has rights, that person cannot say that no, I have the rights, but I will not partake of the liabilities at all. Another important aspect here is, and in fact, I am proud to say very humbly that I was practically the only person who wrote, in fact, in Mullah's Hindu law, only commentator who wrote that now the female, the daughter, has one very important right, the right to be a karta, the manager of the family. That issue also again travelled to the Delhi High Court. It has rested there, it has not gone further. But the Delhi High Court has, referring to what I have stated, said that the daughter becomes a karta also. So equality in all respects has now been given, with the daughter also having the right to become a karta. That of course has its own implications, because some might say that, oh, she's married, gone over. All those things of course have to be taken into consideration. What is her seniority qua the brothers? All these are again, so far as being a karta is concerned, they are again social issues, socio-legal issues, I would say. We have this word politico-legal issues. I would say this is a socio-legal issue. Probably they would have to have a session sitting together and trying to find out a way. But the daughter also has the right to become a karta. There are of course other rights available under the section. They need not be discussed here. Now, so far as the amendments to the Hindu Succession Act are concerned, another change that took place, and this is not about Section 6. There was one section in the Hindu Succession Act called Section 23. What was that section? It said that suppose there is a house property, the female, that is the sister, could get a right in the property, but there was a limitation. Only if the brothers decide to divide the property amongst themselves. So till the time that the brothers decided, the sister had no rights. Fortunately and rightly so, that section has been completely done away with in view of what has been written in Section 6. Therefore, the daughter can straight away lay a claim even to the family home. Of course, social issues would of course be there. Suppose there is only one residence, no other co-partnery property. what would be the practical way out once the sister demands? Brothers also cannot be left homeless. If maybe they sit together, they could find out a way, say, either sell off the house, take smaller houses for all, the sister takes away her share, or the brothers would probably have to pool in, give the sister her share, and satisfy the needs of the law. So that section 23 is also gone, fortunately. So these are the important changes that have taken place in Hindu law. I doubt very much that it would now be open to many more interpretations, because more or less the concept of equality in law is satisfied, at least so far as Hindu Mitakshara Kopasnari is concerned. And I would probably leave it at that and open this up to uh, questions from all of you.
Thank you very much, Advocate Desai, for that very, very enlightening talk on Section 6. We now take questions from the participants. So let us look at the. Okay, one question that has been asked. This is by Bishwa Joy Das, who has asked, in a family, the brother transferred one house of the father in his name. Sir, I hope you're able to see this question in the chat box by Bishwa.
No, I'm not able to see it, but you can just spell it out, please.
Okay. It's a pretty long question, so maybe we'll come to that later, or I could request Mr. Vishwa Joy Das to maybe shorten that question. But I will ask you the second question that he has asked,
Okay.
which is, can a will supersede the provisions of the Indian Succession Act 2005, and can a will be contested? This is the question that he has asked.
Very nice, very pertinent, and an important question, I would say. See, if you look at the provisions of Section 30 of the Hindu Succession Act, what does it say? That a Hindu a Hindu can make a will of any property that he has a right over. So, separate property obviously can be dealt with in a will. Courts have interpreted it this way, that even the co-partner's share of the property can be dealt with in a will. Now, how is that done? Suppose, let us say, I am a co-partner in a co-partnery. I cannot obviously say in the will that I leave the co-partnery property to XYZ. I can only deal with my portion of the property. So notionally, if I have 1/5 or 1/7 of the property, I can say that I have right now a 1/7 share in the co-partnery property, and I can deal with that. I cannot deal with the whole of the co-partnery property. If the whole of the co-partnery property is dealt with in the will, then the will would be set aside to that extent. But that portion of the property that can come to a co-partner can definitely be dealt with, and the courts would obviously set aside such a will.
Okay. Thank you, sir. The other question which has come up is, in reference to advocating gender neutral laws in specific reference to Indian inheritance laws, can you please comment on the practices of hak tyag, which is widely practiced in Rajasthan and also in Haryana, I believe, and also the concept of stridhan. how it is different from
Practice,
the concept
practice of what?
dowry.
Can you repeat the word practice of?
Practice of hak tyag,
Hak tyag.
which is
Yes, yes.
practiced, yes, which
Hak
is
tyag.
practiced very widely in Rajasthan and Haryana,
Yes.
and also the concept of Stridan, how that is different from dowry.
Yes. Uh, See, Hak Tyag is not something that is there prevalent only in Rajasthan. It is prevalent everywhere else also. And in fact, the law recognizes it. Of course, if it is done forcefully and somebody says that it has been done forcefully, then of course it has to be proved by the person who is claiming so. But it's valid if it is done in a proper manner. Suppose I have a share. I say that I don't want my share in the property. Maybe, say, suppose I have a share worth 1 crore of rupees somewhere. I say that I am giving that up, and in that place, if the family is giving me something, yes, that is a hak tyag, it can definitely be done. But if it has been done in a forcible manner, and if the person is able to prove it, then obviously it would and should be set aside by the courts. Now, so far as uh, the question of Stridhan is concerned, it is a completely different issue. What is Stridhan? Anything that is given to a daughter upon marriage, any gifts that are given to her on marriage, even by her in laws, in fact, that constitutes the Stridhan of that bride, that lady who has got married. That is separate from whatever rights that she might have as a co-partner in her father's family. Stridhan is her own right. Nobody else has a right over it. So it's a completely different concept. Stridhan and co-partnery have nothing to do with each other.
Thank you, sir. This is another question which has come in. A brother transfers the family property in his name. Subsequently, he transfers it for another property of one of the sisters. Can another sister challenge this as if the transfer never took place?
If the transfer by the brother was surreptitious, obviously it can be challenged in a court of law. That's the short answer that I would give.
Okay. I would just take this opportunity as well to ask you a few questions.
Sure.
So, what you have said about this particular interpretation of the Supreme Court, where you have said that in Prakash versus Pulvati,
Yes.
that of course the interpretation was wrong because the Supreme Court said that the father had to be alive.
Yes.
And you said that the Supreme Court perhaps imported the Dayabhaga concept into Mitakshara law. I find that a very, very interesting point that you have made, and it would really be good for the students as well to research a little bit and examine this perspective a
Yes.
little more. But of course, as you have rightly said, one cannot really, with complete conviction, understand what exactly was on the Supreme Court's mind. But this is a very refreshing idea that you have brought
I in
about.
fact said it in the context of Uttam versus Subhag Singh.
Yeah, that's right. I'm sorry. I stand corrected. Now, though within Mitakshara law there have been all these kind of law reforms, and the 2005 amendment and its latest interpretation has brought about more
Clarity.
of gender equality than we had in the past. I'm just wondering, sir, and I put it to you, for your comments, your expert comments, that the Hindu Succession Act 1956 continues to have certain gender discriminatory provisions apart from Section 6, apart from Section 23, which has now been deleted from the statute. Even apart from that, there are certain gender discriminatory provisions, I feel, which sit very uncomfortably side by side with the constitutional guarantee of right to
Equality.
life and equality and non-discrimination. For example, there are two separate schemes of succession for men and women, and within the scheme for women, there is again a difference based on the source of the woman's property. Was it inherited from the parents? Was it
Yes.
inherited from the husband or father-in-law? And depending on that, whether there is a presence of children or no presence of
Yes.
children, based on this, the scheme differs. But this is not so for the men. And if I'm not wrong, I think the Hindu law is the only one which has this kind of a different scheme
Difference.
for men and different scheme for women.
Hmm.
So this was something that I would like to get your opinion on. One other discriminatory provision is the whole preference that is given to agnates over cognates. So that is another thing, and also how uterine blood relatives are not given any kind of recognition, while half blood is given. So it's like full blood is preferred to half blood,
Yes.
and but then uterine blood is excluded.
Yes.
So these are some gender discriminatory provisions which I thought I would really like to hear from you how you think that
Yes. Yeah.
these should they be reformed? What was
Correct.
the philosophy? What did the legislature have in mind?
Correct, correct. Now, if I take the last segment first, let us talk about uterine blood. If we speak about uterine blood, what really happens? That is, children of the female through someone else, maybe. Correct?
Yeah.
The bloodline differs. Though, of course, there is now gender equality, still, I would say that, of course, the male line still continues. However, you see, patrimony, or patriarchy still continues fine enough. But what you are speaking of when you speak of uterine blood is the difference is because the bloodline changes. And when you speak of co-partner, you are speaking of one bloodline. That is why the difference. So far as, yes, Section 15 is concerned, three modes. As you said, why the difference between male succession and female succession? Probably the reason is this. At the back of the mind, probably the legislature had this. That earlier, as you know, of course, no rights, only right of maintenance, as I said. But while speaking of succession to females, Section 15, they probably felt that the daughters are going to go away getting married. That is probably what they had in mind when they formulated this. But if you look at the scheme of 15, what is the first section is, of course, the property of a Hindu female dying intestate shall go in the following manner, and those classes of heirs are given. Of course, class 1 are available, then the second category will not be there, and so on and so forth. So that is one. When you go to the second subsection, subsection 2, the difference is there, it begins there. And what is the difference that they have brought about? Suppose there is a Hindu female who has no children. She dies without making a will. And in fact, probably the words that are used are widow, if I am not mistaken. If she dies a widow. Let us just check section 15 wording. Yes, first subsection says that property inherited by a Hindu female from her father or mother shall devolve in the absence of a son or daughter of the deceased, not upon the other as referred to in one, but it will go to the heirs of the father. And why is that? Why is that done? The reason is probably this: if there are no children, then the property should move back to its source, so that it goes back to the source from where it came. So you can say that partly the concept of probably Stridhan was imported here. You could say that. You could probably say that. Because in the absence of a son or daughter, what happens? Others would take the property. Others, maybe who are not entitled to it, would take the property. If she has no children. If you look at the second part of subsection 2, it says that if she has inherited property from her husband or from her father-in-law. So here it speaks about her inherited property from husband or father-in-law. Therefore, this presupposes that the husband is dead. Father-in-law is also dead. She has no children. Then if such property were to travel to her parents' family, that would be a dichotomy. Therefore, it has to go back to the source. Namely, it would go back to the father-in-law or the husband's family. Here what would happen is, she dies, the husband is not there, father-in-law is not there. So if, say, that she has inherited the property from her husband, then the provisions of Section 8 of the Hindu Succession Act will come into play here. And the heirs of the husband will have to be decided. And the property will thereafter travel to the heirs of the husband. The reason is that the property should not go to those who are not entitled to it. That is probably the reason. Otherwise, what will happen? Say, if I say it in Hindi or maybe even in English, why should it go to a nephew? Why should it not go to the source from whence it came? Suppose her brother-in-law's child gets the property. Why? Property has come to her from her father. Father is dead. She is gone. She has no children. Might as well go back to the source. That is what the Supreme Court has said in 2001, I believe. That is probably AIR 2005, I believe, page 1, Supreme Court, AIR Supreme Court. It has to go back to the source. That's the interpretation put by the Supreme Court here. So that the property doesn't go to people not entitled to it. That's what they have said.
But just one further clarification on what you have said, sir.
Yes.
About the property being has to go back to the source, and the source be either the woman's parents. Or the woman's husband or father-in-law. But somewhere this doesn't recognize that she could have self-acquired property as well. And then it results in a judgment like this, Om Prakash versus Radhacharan,
Ah.
where you have this young girl, a 15-year-old girl who was thrown out of her matrimonial home, and then there was a lot of violence by her matrimonial family. She was thrown out. Her parents took care of her. She became very successful in life. She acquired a lot of property. She died childless, and then the Supreme Court decided that that property should go to the husband's relatives. The husband was also dead. Her family members, her mother and her brothers, claimed that property. And the Supreme Court said, as per Section 15(2), it has to go to the husband's heirs. Now, how fair is that kind of a judgment? And that kind of a judgment comes about because the legislature doesn't seem to have recognized that women are citizens by themselves, and
Of
they are
course.
capable of acquiring property on their own as well. It is not merely property that is passed down from the parents or the
Correct.
husband or the father-in-law. They also can have property.
Obviously. But there probably, you see, if you look at section 15(1) itself, this was property that was, in Om Prakash, as you said, it was property that was earned by her through her own means, right?
Yes. Yes.
So it would not fall either in first part of 2 or even the second part of 2. And as you said, she had no children.
Yes.
Yes. Then if you look at section 15A, what does 15A say? Firstly, upon the sons and daughters, here son and daughter were not there.
Yeah.
Only the husband was there. Was he alive?
Yes. No, he wasn't.
He wasn't.
He wasn't alive.
The husband wasn't
So
alive.
So the property went to the husband's heirs, who had in the first place thrown her out of the matrimonial
Correct.
home
So
at
that
the age of
you are right. See, that was a social situation, unfortunate social situation. But if you go strictly by the interpretation of law, then the husband or his heirs were entitled to it as per 2. I don't remember the exact case, but I'll tell you, very unusual interpretation put by the Supreme Court, unfortunately, somewhere in 1994 or 95, in interpreting section 15. A woman died. She had no children. Sorry, she did have children. The husband was also alive. The Supreme Court said that no, the husband will not be entitled to the property. It's only the children that will be entitled to the property. Unfortunately, just a 1-page judgment or 1.5-page judgment if you go by what is the page size of SCC. Very wrong judgment. Of course, later on, you can say by implication, they set it aside and said that, of course, the husband would also be entitled because he is there in any case. How can you say that the husband is not entitled? So they put that right. And in that Om Prakash case, as I said, because she had got the property by her own volition, it would fall within the first part of section 15. That is why the interpretation. And the other part, of course, is a socio-legal issue. That is something that maybe I don't know how the legislature can take care of that. But maybe on the social level, something has to be done. Something more, something more than has been done.
Any comments on the agnates, preference of agnates over cognates, sir?
Again, just one word that I may use is bloodline. I would end my comment on that. Bloodline. Pure bloodline takes precedence. In the absence of agnates, cognates, otherwise not. So bloodline, issue of bloodline. Blood is thicker than water is the answer that I would give.
Okay, thank you, sir. So I'm reading out a question which has been asked by
Sure.
a student. This is the student who had asked an earlier question. He is
Oh, yes.
pursuing with a further question.
Sure.
I'm just reading it out.